Good morning. Hi, everybody here at the Zendo, and hello, everybody online. We have a few hearty souls here, and some very wise people online, I think, staying home in this stormy day here. But I'm glad to be with everybody. And for those I haven't met, my name is Fusho. My heart and mind are really in Minneapolis. I can't help it. It was really another gripping day yesterday and night of headlines and news and fear and shock and concern and anger. It can be really hard to try to get our bearings when we're following the news, but we're not there, we're here, but we know what's happening. And taking some deep breaths and being here together in the middle of this storm is really helpful. So, federal officials sought to portray a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident killed by Border Patrol agents yesterday as a domestic terrorist, saying he wanted to massacre law enforcement, even as videos emerged that appeared to directly contradict their account. And those videos emerged immediately and were verified very quickly, right after it unfolded. The man, Alex Jeffrey Preddy, was an intensive care nurse, described by the Minneapolis police chief as a U.S. citizen with no criminal record. Federal officials said he was armed, but there's no sign in videos analyzed by the New York Times and many others. Many of the government officials took a look too, locally. And there's no sign that he pulled his weapon or that agents even knew he had one until he was already pinned on the sidewalk. And an agent had already removed Mr. Preddy's gun when two other agents opened fire, shooting him in the back as he lay on the ground. At least 10 shots were fired, killing him. And Mr. Preddy had a legal permit to carry a firearm, said the police chief, Brian O'Hara. Eyewitnesses, local officials, and the victim's family have challenged that account, pointing out he had a phone in his hand, not a weapon. And his parents accused the administration of spreading sickening lies about what happened. And they hope to get the truth out about their son. He's the third person to be shot in Minneapolis, and the second to be killed during this invasion by our own government, the Department of Homeland Security. And John Mitnick, who once was the head attorney at the Department of Homeland Security in the first Trump administration, said about his former agency last night, "I'm enraged and embarrassed by DHS's lawlessness, fascism, and cruelty." So, the snowstorm gives us an apt metaphor here, but it can really feel these days like everywhere we look, there's a lot of turmoil and a lot of storms. And we're in the middle of one, and then another, and then another. Fortunately, there's a new book out titled Calm in the Storm, I happen to find. And it's by Brother Phap Hu at Plum Village, who was an assistant a very long time, Thich Nhat Hanh's assistant. He's the abbot there now at Plum Village. And another person named Joe Confino, and they have a podcast, which I didn't listen to, but it's very popular. But they wrote this book together. I think the podcast is called The Way Out is In. And Joe's a journalist and a mentor and a stability specialist, does coaching. And I think he wrote a bunch of different publications a while ago. So they say that the title of the book, Calm in the Storm, is inspired by one of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, in which he uses the metaphor of a boat battered by a big storm and in danger of sinking. The passengers and crew on this boat are fearful, and they're frantically running from one side of the deck to the other. If everyone panics like this, they point out, or Thich Nhat Hanh points out, the ship will surely be lost. But if even one person is able to remain calm, their stability might be transmitted to others. And then there's a chance the crew of this sinking ship will be able to work together to save the vessel and their own lives. So we hope that's what our practice can offer us, is a little calm in the storm. And of course, our personal practice, just sitting on the cushion every day, can be its own storm. We can find ourselves in the middle of all kinds of turmoil. And so the reminder for me of coming back to this breath is always helpful, very helpful, when things are tumultuous in particular. And they remind us to start benefiting from Zen involves no complexity or esoteric knowledge or years of formal training. All that is needed to get going is to take the first breath, and then to keep breathing with awareness, to take the first mindful step, and then to keep walking. Cultivating calm in the storm is neither a sprint nor a marathon. We can deepen our understanding until our very last breath and share the wisdom we accumulate along the way with others, who can then further develop their own insights. And in the theme of our study text, being alive and examining birth and death, there was a piece in Tricycle also by Thich Nhat Hanh about zazen and meditating. And he says to meditate is to be alive. To meditate is to connect. To meditate is really to feel that you are a miracle of life. And by developing our agency over our breath, we can strengthen deep looking and understanding, which in turn can give us a taste of freedom. Zazen allows us to be exactly how we are and who we are in this moment. And the study text we've been taking a look at, that Dogen's reminder is an encouragement, is just to understand that birth and death itself is nirvana. And there's nothing such as birth and death to be avoided. And there's nothing such as nirvana to be sought. And only when we realize this can we be free from birth and death. But boy, it doesn't feel like we are these days, does it? The brother Phap Hu, who's at Plum Village, writes that when he was starting out, first following the breath as a young teenager, it was very tumultuous and painful. And he said, my mind often questioned me, what are you doing here? But he learned exactly in those moments. He got to hear himself. And then to identify the emotions that were present. And sometimes we make a mistake of thinking that our sitting seeks to achieve something or do something. But it's good to remember that zazen is being. And the sitting is to be alive and very present to what is going on, what is happening in that storm. How can I be with that? It's simply embracing and allowing us to be in this moment in a really deeply attentive, curious way, and to be aware of the quality of our presence. So as we breathe, we begin to know we are here and we are alive, and this is love and acceptance. And taking refuge in each breath from the beginning all the way to the end, from the beginning of the breath to the end of the breath, whether we're sitting in meditation or going about our day, develops awareness. We know this, but it's not the same as actually doing it for ourselves, with each other. So can we come back to the breath? That's a real thing. Can we follow it from the beginning to the end? Can we be with it for the inhale and the exhale? And if not, can we gently come back and notice? Nothing can interfere with this moment. We're truly present. For our breath truly is how we are present for ourselves. And we can take refuge in that. And so we can say to ourselves, I'm just going to stick with my in-breath from the beginning to end. And then we start to develop stillness. And when we're emotional, we can feel our breath changing. When we're angry, our breath changes. When we're agitated, when we're sad. And by knowing our breath, we know ourselves. And by making the connection between our emotions and our breathing, we can accompany whatever emotion is arising and not allow it to hijack our awareness. Not that that's an easy thing, but we can always return to it. So they started writing this book, I guess. They said that our dread of civilizational collapse is forcing us, whether we know it or not, to touch our own mortality. And as we increasingly seek refuge in our own echo chambers, there's a profound repercussion for the political sphere, and we're experiencing a lot of polarization. But this practice offers an alternative path and helps us understand there's no need to fear our mortality. And they did a podcast with Joanna Macy, who we know, we've mentioned before, longtime environmental activist and Buddhist scholar. And she speaks about the possibility of death, and has been, or did, she's no longer with us, but for a long time, as a possibility of being a gift. She says death walks with us, and that is the great mystery. And she says, I love the way it's put in the writings of the Dharma. Death is certain, but the time of death is uncertain. So it's a double whammy. You're going to die, and you don't know when. It could be 5 minutes or 50 years. And this keeps us on an edge of presence. We're on a borrowed time, and this gives us a quality of being able to be present and in the now, because it's all we know and have. And she says, in this moment of great danger in the world, there's not only room to dwell in sorrow, but it represents the greatest time to be alive, since we have the chance to individually and collectively carve out a new path of love. So I think as we're sitting with our breath and reminding ourselves to return to that, inhale and exhale. That's why we talk about developing the courage of a warrior to face our own habits and suffering in meditation. And it can be really challenging. But also, the beauty of this is that we are reminded that we're always changing, and we can create new stories. And Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that the practice is to arrive home in each moment, to touch the peace and joy that are within us, and to open our eyes to the wonders of life around us. We can touch the war that is also going on inside us or around us. But if we're careful, and we have developed concentration, stability, and energy, we can hopefully avoid being overwhelmed. Brother Phap says, as being Thich Nhat Hanh's attendant, living with him side by side for 17 years, he learned that the legacy he left for the next generation was walking and acting with such freedom, with such strength. You can be at home anywhere. So if you're really present when you hear or read the news, of course it's impossible not to suffer. We would be running away from reality. But the core practice is to recognize suffering without drowning in it or being a victim of the suffering. To embrace, accept, and see what to do and what not to do. And this is our practice. And that is how we cultivate our inner calm. And that is how we cultivate calm in any storm. In a world that urges constant motion, the practice of pausing, sitting, breathing, and coming home to ourselves is a radical act. Buddha's different translations, but that used to say, and a lot of the things that we learn and chant about are how our greatest pain is caused by our notions of coming and going. I was reading a reporter and columnist named Lydia Polgreen. She went to Minneapolis and wrote about what's happening and kind of sent a dispatch and writes that she glimpsed a civil war. She quoted Keith Ellison, Minnesota's Attorney General, who told her, "This is tyranny. There's no other way to put it. We're all shocked by it. Nobody ever thought America would look like this. We now don't have to speculate as to what American fascism looks like. It's right outside the door." And another person she spoke to said that the community response has been disciplined and robust. With none of the property destruction that marked the protests after the murder of George Floyd, when a police precinct burned to the ground. Back then it was internal tensions that exploded, but now it's an outside force, our own government, besieging the city. He said, "I think what we've learned as a community," this is just a community member, is to try to keep it calm this time around. And I also think our Minneapolis Police Department learned from that incident, and we're all trying to keep our calm. It seems like the feds want to incite something here. But you know, it does, from what we've seen, look like a strong, compassionate resistance happening there with neighbors and communities and in school districts and with clergy. People are saying, this isn't right, and are standing up. She writes, "The exceptional broad solidarity I saw across the Twin Cities is emblematic of the qualities that have made Minnesota such an irritant to Trump, because they function quite well and take care of each other and have a pretty good quality of life." The person she spoke to said, "My goal isn't to become a political activist. It's our responsibility as citizens, whichever side of the aisle you lean toward, to protect the Constitution, and we're all given inalienable rights via that Constitution." She says, "It echoed something I heard from a 17-year-old high school junior she met, who was among hundreds of students who walked out of class to march on the state capitol to demand that ICE leave Minnesota." He said, ICE might not break into my house and try to take one of my family members because we're all white. But I'm not going to not care just because it's not going to happen to me. That's irresponsible. That's disrespectful, and it's sinful, honestly. Sounds like a bodhisattva to me. So from calm in the storm, true engagement with the world begins not in grand gestures, but in small, steady moments of presence at critical times. When we touch the stillness within, we begin to touch the world with more care. From this grounded place, our actions, no matter how humble, can become part of a collective awakening. And this is how we bring our practice into the world, not to escape its suffering, but to meet it with clarity, resilience, and love. And Dogen reminds us there is a simple way to become a Buddha. When you refrain from unwholesome actions, are not attached to birth and death, and are compassionate toward all sentient beings, respectful to seniors and kind to juniors, not excluding or desiring anything, with no thoughts or worries, you will be called a Buddha. So Lydia Polgreen writes, for all their military gear and unchecked power, the federal agents flooding the city, like the president ultimately commanding them, seem unprepared for what they're facing here. Like the agent who slipped on ice, they have misjudged the ground beneath their feet. A state full of ordinary people, real estate agents, high school students, solar energy consultants, who've decided that watching their neighbors being dragged away is an intolerable sin. And I was reminded of, sadly, and it scared me to have to go look it up, Eleanor Roosevelt's speech at the UN, titled The Struggle for Human Rights, that she gave in 1948, at the Sorbonne to rally global support. You know, at that time they were resisting fascism and authoritarianism in Russia. But here we are. After the Cold War, was rising tensions. She emphasized that Universal Declaration of Human Rights provided essential basic standards for all of us and was crucial for global peace and to inspire hope for a future where freedom and dignity were universal. And she says, we must not be confused about what freedom is. Basic human rights are simple and easily understood. Freedom of speech and a free press, freedom of religion and worship, freedom of assembly and the right of petition, the right of people to be secure in their homes, and free from unreasonable search and seizure and from arbitrary arrest and punishment. Those are the things that are at stake. And so a dispatch from Minnesota that came last night. Residents throughout the Twin Cities are setting out candles to memorialize Alex Preddy. A single flame flickered in a second-story apartment window. A row of votives illuminated the icy walkway of a house. Red and white candles are glowing on porches throughout the streets of Minneapolis. And I hope we can light our own candle here together as well.